As the world opens into what many of us are perceiving is greater compassion, greater connectedness, and caring among people and between people and other species, how can we stand as a welcoming and supportive space for people who are feeling held back by skepticism? I've brought the wonderful Saskia van Diest back onto the podcast today. You can hear her also in episode 40, where we dived deep into discussing her work in nature communication. But I've brought her back today because she's had some recent experiences and has a beautiful story about a fantastic award that her work has received. And I really want to draw attention to that, and also some very striking experiences that she had in the process of receiving that award. So I do encourage you to go back and hear episode 40 if you want to learn more about the details of Saskia's work. We may get into some of that today about exactly how she moves in the world as a nature communicator. But I'll briefly introduce her before we continue with our conversation and tell you that she has a PhD in plant pathology. She did 2 academic postdoctoral fellowships. She has published, so she is well grounded in academic science. And as she was doing all of that work, she trained in nature communication, and that is primarily where she works now. As Saskia says on her website, ecofluency.org, and I encourage you to visit and sign up for her newsletter, she says that she believes nature communication is a critical skill for future resilience. I certainly agree, and a fundamental and vital resource for harmonious relationship with all life. I very much agree on that topic as well. And Saskia, it's such a pleasure to have you back. Please tell us about this remarkable award you've received, which is such a beautiful glimpse into some of the openings and greater flexibilities that are occurring in our world right now.
Thank you, Cher. Thank you for having me back on. I really appreciate any opportunity, any platform to be able to speak about nature communication. And it's a huge honor that Ecofluency won this award. So it is a local award in South Africa called Ecologic. And the purpose of it is to be able to recognize and promote eco champions in South Africa. And there are 12 categories, one of which is eco innovation. So this was an award given for innovation in any field that allows for innovative thinking around solutions for the future. Because as David Parry Davies, who's a founder of Enviropedia and also of Ecologic Awards, he describes that it's like Albert Einstein was saying, is that the same logic that created the issues that we face cannot be used to create the solutions for those problems. And and the same is true in my thinking with ecofluency, is that it requires us to be truly innovative and to co-create with the intelligence of nature, because that's really where inspiration comes from. And this is what all the greatest inventors and artists and innovators ever came up with, is in co-creation with the bigger field, the consciousness. And nature communication allows an access point into that bigger wisdom, intelligence, and power of all of the universe, of all of nature. Because in nature communication, if we're working with an animist worldview, everything becomes everyone. And so therefore, everyone, whether it's that plant you can see in the background, or a couch cushion, or the bird that this painting is of, a sugar bird, or your gut microbiome, any aspect of nature becomes an access point to a much larger resource field of whether it's information, whether it's support, whether it's power. And so, long story short, basically, this award was given, and there were 3, there were bronze, silver, and gold. And I honestly didn't expect to be winning gold. I thought that I would maybe win bronze or silver. And I won gold, and I was so stoked. And I didn't even have an acceptance speech prepared because I really wasn't expecting it.
So
but it
you
is a
didn't know until you were at the event?
no, no, no.
Oh,
We were just told that we were one
that
of the
you had
finalists.
won. Oh
I'd
my
won
goodness.
something. And
Right.
part of the reason why I thought I wasn't going to be winning gold is because David had called me a few months before and said, please, would you prepare a presentation on nature communication for the awards ceremony for the audience? And I thought maybe there'd be loads of presentations. I was one of two. The other one was on biomimicry,
Oh,
and which is a very perfectly interrelated field. They
yes.
perfectly complement each other. But
Yes.
I wasn't expecting to win gold because I thought that the reason he had asked me to give this presentation was kind of as a compensation prize. And I never said this to him, but I was kind of like, thank you for the opportunity because I didn't know what the judges would think, you know. And apparently the judges were quite strict in their way of thinking, as they should be. So I was given gold, and what I said also in the acceptance speech is that this is a huge honor for all of nature because this recognizes that everyone working in the wider field of nature connectedness, nature communication, that this is for them as well. So I was stoked because this is Ecofluency's first award. Um, and it's 4 years, just over 4 years into having founded it. It feels huge. And it's partly, I believe, because I actively put myself out there to be a representative voice for the more than, not just for the more than human, but for the field of nature communication. For example, I love doing podcast interviews like with you because it gives people an opportunity to see that if and I sometimes joke that I'm a recovering academic, but really it's just like, if I, as somebody who's come from a very limited way of thinking as a background, can do this, then so can anyone else. It doesn't matter whether you are an academic background, whether you've come from a corporate background, whether you're an artist or a farmer or a housewife, anybody who is human is also nature. And you and I both know this. I must have spoken about it in the first podcast interview I did with you, which is because we are human and therefore we are nature, and because all of the universe is interrelated, because there's relationship, what is fundamental to our relationship is communication. And so nature communication happens in a wide variety of ways. So anybody listening for the first time to this podcast and to me speaking will might appreciate just for 30 seconds describing that information comes to us in many different ways, whether it's thoughts, emotions, feelings, sensation, intuition, imagination, inspiration, dreams, signs and symbols in our environment, synchronicities in our life. These are all different ways in which nature speaks to us. And so we can open up our capacity for listening through activating our body as this instrument for listening. And not just our physical bodies, of course, that is really important, but also our entire field, our more than physical, becomes that listening instrument as well. And I think of it as a science, an art, and a magic because it is exactly that. Because I joke about myself being recovering academic, it means that I really appreciate when there's rigor, when there's structure, when there's discipline in how we approach learning a new skill. For example, anybody learning a new sport will benefit from learning the rules, understanding certain structures. Like you learn a tennis swing so that your body develops that muscle memory. If you just were to put a racket in a child's hand, of course they might eventually get it, or but it's like, why not just learn from those who came before? And I found it beneficial learning in a structured way. So that's the science aspect of it. The art is that it's creative. It activates our capacity for creativity in all these different ways. We've got opposable thumbs and we have bodies and we can sing and we can dance and we can make art. And we can make ritual and ceremony and pilgrimage as these ways of creating a container for listening in a different way and involving the more than human as stakeholder in any kind of decision-making process when we create these containers in ritual and ceremony, because it activates a different aspect of us. There's something very primordial, ancestral about creating a ritual in whatever form, It doesn't matter what it looks like. Anything can become a ritual. Of course, there are ways and means of doing that can create a framework, but ultimately it's just being able to activate one's creativity and bring about change to occur in alignment with your will, which is kind of off the back of what the definition of magic is, according to oh God, what was his name? He was a dude in the early 1900s who was really brilliant. He was quite an occultist. I forget his name offhand right now, but he had this definition of magic, and so that can be adapted to ritual. And by the way, that if one's wanting to learn ritual, I highly recommend a colleague in our field, sort of wider field. I consider him one of the people whose work I follow, Dr. Daniel Fuhr, through ancestralmedicine.org. He has brilliant teachings on ritual, not just for being able to access communication with ancestors, but being able to work with ritual as a foundational tool in everyday life as well. But I digress. Um, the point I wanted to share is that what this tells me, Ecofluency winning gold for a public award and being seen on TV to do so, because the award ceremony was also recorded and then screened multiple times on TV over the next few weeks, is that what it tells me is that it's a movement whose time has come, really. And the fact that you and I both know there are multiple research projects going on at very well-known, highly acclaimed international universities, um, with funding, like, for example, European Research Council funding. Vanessa Weingarten is doing a brilliant research project on that as well.
I wanted to
Professor,
make sure that you knew of her and her
yeah,
her recent grant funding. I've
yeah,
cited one of her publications in an article I've been working on and have met with her before and am friendly with one of her collaborators. So I'm so happy that you know about her work. And I agree, very striking that she received major European Union funding for her work.
yeah, yeah. Because it's not that we need to be throwing out science. People often say, okay, but this is so woo and it means that you're going to be replacing science. No. If anything, this just expands our way of thinking and our decision making and our thought processes and our research methodologies to be in co-creation with the more than human. Like, for example, Dr. Monica Gagliano did with the plants when she was designing these research projects. She was co-creating them with the intelligence of the plants. They were the ones actually designing the experiments and guiding her in the process.
And for
And
our audience, the one of her, I think her most wonderful book is, I think her most recent, Thus Spoke the Plant, talks about her immersive experiences in indigenous shamanic contexts, learning from plants, and then taking the plant's guidance back into her laboratory. So
absolutely.
extraordinary.
Absolutely. And there are so many other brilliant researchers who are using nature communication in their work. Professor M.J. Barrett at the at University of Saskatchewan as well. Um, Dr. Lynn Shannon at University of Cape Town, for example. There are so many researchers who are consider themselves nature communicators and are, in addition to being really world-class scientists who are publishing peer-reviewed journal articles which can challenge the worldview not to replace logic, but to add to logic, to complement it in ways where we can be using logic to sense check the information we get using other ways of knowing. And that's what I believe was part of the reason that I got this award was because I positioned nature communication as that. I do my best um, to language it, to use terminology that, of course, is going to be challenging to people's worldviews, but ultimately is inviting, is to say, if I can do it, so can you. This is something that is a language older than any other in this universe. And so it was off the back of that. There were two things that you mentioned in your introduction. There were two things that I wanted to share at the award ceremony that were very striking. And the one was that straight after being awarded the trophy, which is this very heavy glass blue egg, this blue glass egg on its own little stand, and it was very heavy. And I was wearing this very very glitzy dress in a corset underneath. And so I was in heels. I never wear heels. You'll find me barefoot and in like linen shirts most of the time. But so I was there, tootling around on heels, and we get taken downstairs to a different room for a very short interview with the sponsor of the award who presented the award. And it was Reclight who had sponsored the award category that I got awarded gold in for innovation. And so we do a 2 or 3 minute interview, and because the award ceremony was being held at the Two Oceans Aquarium in Cape Town, and that is an extraordinary venue. I mean, to have animals, ocean animals, on the other side of glass, for the award ceremony, that's just too cool, right? So as I'm walking back from that talk, and I didn't even remember what exactly I'd said in that interview, because again, I was just kind of shocked that I'd gotten this award. So I'm noodling back, mincing back in my dress, trying to make sure that my corset was too loose, so it was like it kept slipping around. So I kept having to be like kind of pulling it back around. And as I'm walking past the aquarium tank, I see that there's a turtle that like kind of swims up, and I'm like, "Hey, turtle!" And then there's a little stingray that, or devil ray, actually, I think it was a devil ray, that had floated down and had come to meet me almost. It looked like this beautiful being had come to meet me, and I have for the longest time been had a thing for rays. Especially manta rays. One day I plan to go and have a swim with manta rays, obviously in an ethical way. Because one of my favorite books is by Peter Benchley called The Girl of the Sea of Cortez. And as a child reading that, I always had a thing for all kinds of rays. And so my relationship with the ocean is wanting to one day be with rays. So to have this little ray come and almost land on the sand in front of me on the other side of the glass, and I said the words, "You know that I do this for you." And it's as if the friend of mine who watched the video afterwards, before I posted it on Instagram, said, "It looks like this little ray gives a little nod or a bow of like, yeah, we know." And that nearly made me cry. Like I honestly was about to cry. And I'm like, don't cry. You have a talk to give. You're going to makeup's going to run. But I could have collapsed into a ball on the ground right there because that felt like more than any human's acknowledgement. That was the biggest acknowledgement for me to get, that nature recognizes this. And of course, I know that. Like as a nature communicator, I know that. The rest of the universe has my back always in this work. But to have that physical validation was really special. And of course, one can interpret it as physical validation, who knows? But I'd like to think that it was. So, yeah, that was really, really special. But what was also really significant is right at the end of the award ceremony, after the talk that I had given about nature communication, um, and everybody was leaving to go home, I'm walking out with this bag and this award and uncomfortable dress and heels and so on. And this lady catches up to me, and she it's clear to me that she wants to have a word, but I'm not sure if like what is the vibe? Like what is her agenda? Because it wasn't like immediately obvious that she's there with like a congratulatory feeling. But I never shy away from any kind of interaction around this work because I've put myself in the public eye for this work. So I have to welcome everything that comes and do my best to respond with grace and humility. And I can't always say that I get that right, but that's always the aim, at least. Um, but what was really fascinating is that she chased me down and she started quizzing me on my qualifications, like where I'd gotten my PhD, who was my supervisor. And she was pretty shocked that my qualifications came from a very highly respected university with supervisors who are well-known scientists and researchers. And she said the words, "I can't believe that you've come this far doing what you do." And of course, that can be taken ambiguously. So at first I was like, "Thank you, I think." And then she says that she would wish to see more scientific evidence on nature communication before she would be convinced. And so I said to her, "Look, there's more than 100 years worth of scientific evidence on nature communication." And I shared with her some of the current research projects going on at multiple universities around the world. But it was clear to me that, like, she wanted permission to consider this something she would try herself, because that's what we'll get to in the rest of this talk is really and this conversation is about experiential evidence. But it was clear to me that she was wanting to be convinced logically, but she wasn't just looking for that from me. She was looking for something she could take back and convince her peers about, because really that's what people often are scared about. She's a conservationist, and but she comes from a scientific background. And I said to her, like, no amount of scientific papers changed my mind 13 years ago. I went for a whole year reading books and looking at evidence. What changed my mind was having the embodied experiential evidence. So I could recognize in her the battle that I had once gone through. And I said to her, like, I know what you're going through because I've been there. And she looked at me and she said, but I'm here now. And so there were these glimpses in between of her wanting to poke holes in everything that I was saying, because she would quiz me with these questions and I come back with answers and I don't know if they landed or not. But ultimately, I think what she was looking for was permission and grace. And I'd like to think that I left her with it, although she left kind of with parting shots in a way. But like I said in the newsletter that you had read, she's the perfect external representation of my inner critic. Um, because I'd said even in the presentation that, this had given me a sense of belonging that I had no memory of before. I think that's what she was really yearning for in our interaction, is thinking that of course she loves the earth, because of course she loves the rest of nature, because otherwise she wouldn't be in conservation. She even said to me, like, I really wish that other conservation, like real conservationists, would be getting awards. And I looked at her, I'm like, yeah, me too. But I'd forgotten to say to her, like, the award that I got was not specifically for conservation, it was for innovation. There were other categories for conservation, and conservationists did win that award. So I
It
think
sounds
in
like
her,
there's also grief. I mean,
yes,
it certainly sounds like she, whether she was aware of it or not, was coming to you with rather a big load of longing, skepticism, anger, curiosity that she was suppressing, grief, worry about the environment. Like, she came to you with carrying a lot of emotional weight, I think,
and I
as
experienced this
many people do.
absolutely. And I think the biggest grief is the threat to her worldview. It's not, what if you're wrong? As in, like, this is on you. What if you're wrong? It's, what if I'm wrong? I have to throw out everything I know, which is untrue. You don't have to throw out everything you know. If
Yeah.
you go into this work, it's you can choose incrementally to reconcile this however you want to. I've had people who are devout Catholics and Muslims come to my workshops, and they found a way to realize that in their mind, this is a God-given skill. So he gave it to you, he, she, it, they, whatever, gave it to you for you to make use of, to make this world a better place, for greater love and compassion, to steward this earth in ways that are going to be beneficial for all life. But I think for this lady, and I think this is the last thing that I found was probably very triggering for her, is that I didn't back down. I didn't come across as embarrassed or shameful, and I never have. Many other people have in the past. But I think either it's just because I'm very stubborn, or maybe because I'm not that clued up about what the impact is going to be on the world, or maybe I am. But it was a huge threat to her to see me there, standing in hand with a trophy, um, flaunting my weirdness for all the world to see, and sharing a pretty extreme message on stage and on TV in a ridiculously sparkly dress. That was probably like way too much for her, and she was just like like kind of
Well, her
short-circuiting
nervous
out.
system, right? It was too much for her nervous system. And as I wrote to you, I was just so very struck when I read your account of this in your newsletter, because I've experienced this myself many times in
Okay.
many relationships. And I think people like you and I can fear this experience and its consequences. And but far beyond our own experience is this really important global human question right now of how can more of us open our hearts to life and be a graceful, supportive presence to people who are standing right on the edge of considering that and drawing back in fear because it is such a threat to a particular worldview. Everybody's trying to be safe, of course. And
Mm.
one of the primary ways to be safe, I would actually argue as a historian, possibly the primary way to be safe in about the last 200 years has been to be a rational empiricist and only believe things that can be supported by data. And work like yours and mine and that of so many others, including, as you've mentioned, a number of credentialed people in academia, researchers, it can feel very threatening to people's sense of safety in their rational, empirical, materialist worldview. So it just feels so important to me to kind of name and acknowledge that as we walk through what I believe is a human heart opening to humanity and to the rest of life on this planet, you receiving this award is just such an interesting point along that timeline, because I think you and I both know you probably would not have received this award 5 or 10 years ago. This
No.
is a really interesting point of growth, that you were even considered worthy of nomination and then were taken seriously and then were given the highest award. It's a very, very interesting point in the development of, again, what I see as a gradual and steady and increasingly flowering opening of the human heart to all life.
Absolutely. And what I also wanted to add is that she was one skeptic, one critic, and no doubt there were others there at the awards ceremony, because it was primarily filled the audience with people who are really change makers, are visionaries, are thought leaders in this world, and are also on the ground activists. And they face realities and situations that I have rarely come into contact with. So I fully understand they're needing to protect their way of thinking because it also helps them cope. However, if we're going to continually allow that other people control the narrative and we back down out of fear for disruption, then that narrative continues. And that is a
Yes.
big thing right now. The biggest commodity right now in our world is our attention. And so, if we are allowing our attention to go to feeding old narratives that have stopped serving us for a long time, then that's going to keep continuing. But people like you and myself and other nature communicators are actively, hopefully gently and gracefully and compassionately also disrupting that narrative, not to completely crumble it. I'm not all about like burn it all down. No, I'm here to say yes, and totally hear that you who are mining illegally, strip mining, you who are logging rainforest, you who are doing industrial agriculture with animals, you who are beating up children, there is still hope, not just for the victims, but for the perpetrators, because I know that you are acting from a place of lack and fear. So if I can go out of my way to show compassion to anybody, then that's my job.
Yes.
Doesn't mean I don't still feel anger and hatred. And do I want to do horrible things to those people myself? Of course. But I won't act on that ever. Because then being vengeful, being spiteful, seeking justice in that way is just going to perpetuate the cycle.
Right. You
It doesn't
cannot
mean
add harm to harm and hope
it
for resolution.
it doesn't mean that justice should not be done in ways that fit the current system. You know, the legal system is designed in all the countries in whatever ways are appropriate for those cultures. I'm fully in support of if somebody does something wrong, they should be held accountable for it and punished in whatever ways society believes is appropriate for that. And I also see the value that programs that help to rehabilitate prisoners have done, you know, programs that help to rehabilitate people who are in mental institutions who could have been criminals, who are considered too weird for the society, those who are considered on the outskirts of society, who are considered incompetent, like autistic children. Like, look at the work that Kai Dickens has done for with the Telepathy Tapes podcast in showing that these autistic children have extraordinary capacities, which many of us have known for a long time but haven't been able to convince other people of. So, whoever's willing to pick up the baton or the talking stick and help to add and rewrite certain parts of the narrative to say, you are all relevant, you are all needed, you are all capable of healing, you are all capable of love and compassion and great change in this world, then that adds hope to everybody else, I'd like to
Yeah.
think. And it sounds maybe idealistic to some people listening. Doesn't mean that I myself have not been in that position of literally wanting to take my life because of this. And I've come through that. I've been able to get to the other side of saying, I know what that feels like.
Mhm.
And this is going to maybe sound very unpopular. For some people, that might be the only way out to reset things. I believe in reincarnation. I have enough evidence to have seen that that's a reality.
Yes,
Um,
me too.
so for some people, that is going to be the case, in a very small percentage of people who want to end it. But for the vast majority, it's because they've not yet been given the opportunity to feel the eternal, immense love of this universe, of nature,
Yes.
wanting to include you and be like, child, you are valuable. This world does not need the absence of humans. It needs our full human presence in all the glory that we can bring it, in all the beauty and the hope and the creativity and compassion and fullness. That is what adds power to this world. It's because of humans that we have the most pristine biodiverse ecosystems of this world, like the Amazon rainforest. I mean, the fact that I was flown to Slovenia in June of last year to present a 9-minute plenary talk on this topic of how humans can be reclaiming our role as a keystone species in regenerating ecosystems through the value of nature communication also says to me that this is a movement whose time has come.
Yes.
And so if
Yes.
we can have the humility to simmer down and stop getting on our soapbox about everything that's going wrong and start listening
Yes.
gently for what is right and how to move forward in ways that are more graceful and less dramatic
Yes.
in general, I think that that's what's going to bring about great change.
I agree with you entirely, Saskia. And for our listeners, I'll mention that one resource on this that I like is the doctoral dissertation of the American Indigenous Caucasian scholar Lila June Johnston. I don't remember the full title of her dissertation right now, although I frequently assign it to my students. But it's available online and it's very readable. Scholarship, very easy and engaging. And she delves into exactly this topic of anthropological and cultural evidence that humans have always been a caregiving keystone species when we are paying attention from our hearts in a way that is connected to other species. We are beneficial. We might even be crucial. So it's just such an important topic, so dear to my heart, because I think we've really gone astray in recent decades of the environmental crisis with an assumption that planet Earth would be better off without humanity. That is not only being controverted by some scholarly evidence, but it's also happens to be very contrary to my own spiritual beliefs and understandings. But I just think I'm so glad you brought that up, because we need to get beyond the human shame and guilt and sense of hopelessness and reclaim our identity as a sacred, I would say, divine representative species that have often been here on this planet doing tremendous good for ourselves and other species and can stand in that role again. And I want to highlight too your phrase of I think you said the both and. It seems to me so valuable that you started your career with rigorous and respectable academic training, as did I, and the other scholars you've mentioned, because that does give us the position where, as you so graciously did with the woman skeptic after your talk, you were able to stand firmly in both worlds, the academic rational evidence and your experience and expertise as a plant communicator, the fact that you were able to do that with confidence instead of wilting, I think is also somewhat new right now on what I'm seeing as this timeline of development we're on, because even 5 or 10 years ago, I think a lot of us were having a harder time doing that. Certainly 20 years ago. And it depends on who you look at, of course. And this is not a neat and tidy continuum. But there is a growing confidence that people like you have in this ability to say yes to what we call science and yes to what we call these other auxiliary approaches, which I hope will eventually be well woven into science, as Monica Galliano is doing. Yes to all of it as a whole array of ways of knowing and ways of being, ways of sensing, ways of communicating and relating and doing good and being a kind and loving presence here.
Something that you just said made me realize that I don't think I would have been this confident while I was in academia.
Oh, no. No, no, no,
Because
no, no.
because to me, academia felt very much like this benevolent grandfather who will give you everything you need, the funding, the position, blah, 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 if you play the game according to the rules.
Mm-hmm.
So as
If you
long as you
stay
do what you're
inside the
told,
box.
yes, you'll get everything you need as long as you do what you're told. And it's almost like I had to break free from that. I had to like defect from the family in a way, and felt like I had to go out into the wilderness on my own and create eco-fluency. And I recognized that having the academic background gave me the privilege to set up eco-fluency in ways that those who wouldn't have an academic background might find harder to do. So I'm not saying that what I did was more difficult as a result of academia. In some ways, my skills, I felt like my skills developing personally was more difficult. But in a way, as you pointed out, the fact that I can speak nerd and I can speak woo, if I can put it that way, mean that I can appeal to a wider set of audiences. It also helps that my PhD was in agriculture, which, by the way, is awful that we never planted anything and like we're taught how to run a farm during a PhD in agriculture. But of course, it's about research. It's about like how to design the research projects. But I just feel like we should have had more practical skills. Anyway,
I say that
even
about
so,
undergraduate education. Yes.
all the time, I bet. So however, the fact that I was able to do my degrees in agriculture means that there's some terminology that helps me to speak to people who are working with the landscapes, whether they are farmers, whether they're food gardeners, whether they're landscapers, whether they're forestry engineers, whether they're conservationists. There's a certain set of language that I can speak in a limited way that that appeals to them, that meets them and their needs. So now, for example, when I do energetic land clearings and communications for people's farms or for their nature reserves, I'm able to speak in a way that appeals to them, that meets them where they are. Because part of what this conversation around bridging ontologies, if we put it that way, part of that is not just having the compassion, but knowing what is their ontology to begin with before we start asking them to step onto the bridge to meet us where we are halfway. And so that means getting out of our bubbles and not being in an echo chamber of which is what social media will feed. Your algorithm will feed you into a corner of like just looking at particular videos. And so when I am met with people who are very different in their worldviews, or maybe have currently have the worldview that I used to have, it's a good mirror of where am I now in my understanding of the world. Let's not forget I was here 13 years ago. Have compassion for that person, but also provide opportunities for them to step into something different. And I was this close to just offering her a free spot in a workshop of mine to say, like, why don't you come try it for yourself? Um, I haven't done that because I had a feeling that if she really wanted to, she would, and I didn't want to put her in a corner and make her feel pressured or um, whatever. But the point is, now she knows about that. She knows that it exists. maybe in a few years' time or a few months' time, something shifts in her. And whether it's through me or through another nature communicator or through a synchronistic event of its own, she will have her own experience, I'm hoping, with a being of the more than human realm, that something changes. More than anything, I want people like that to feel belonging, because it was when I did the very first workshop in animal communication 13 years ago with Anna Breitenbach, the biggest change in my life was not, wow, I can now chat with any aspect of nature. That was huge. That changed, literally, that weekend workshop was the turning point for the rest of my life. Changed everything. But actually, the biggest revelation I came home with was that I don't have to feel lonely ever again. And I hadn't realized how lonely I'd felt until that point. And I say this in almost every single public speech that I share, is that is actually what we have. People talk about a loneliness epidemic, and that's
Yeah.
what's going to what is going to drive so many people's decisions. So if they were making these decisions from a place of knowing that they are loved and they are supported and they're resourced, and they felt that in an embodied way, that would really change our decision making and would
Oh,
drive
yes.
behavior in a different direction.
Yes.
So that's what I do with ecofluency, is provide opportunities for people to have their own experiences. And so a lot of my teaching is in person, as well as being online. But I love those opportunities. I love those opportunities. Yeah.
Very much. And I really respect how you are modeling being an open door for people. We can never control or mandate whether others are willing to open to a new perspective or open more fully into capacities that you and I would believe that they have, whether or not they believe it. But what does seem so crucial right now is standing as the open door and then allowing others to walk through if and when they choose. And it is truly exciting and encouraging to me that so many of us now are standing as that open door. 10, 20 years ago, there were a few famous weird people like Anna Breitenbach, who's, been a forerunner in this work, others like her. But now, I mean, if you and I tried to count the number of people like you and me, I don't think we could. And that's wonderful. That's wonderful,
Yeah.
wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
So we'll definitely talk before we close about your current offerings so people know. I guess I'd like to offer you a choice of two different topics as we close, and whichever one is more interesting to you is great. So one possibility is, do you want to offer people some reminders about, if they've never engaged in nature communication, or they dabbled a bit in the past and have not stayed with it, what are some ways to enter into this sphere oneself? Or the other topic, and we're not in a rush, we can address both if you wish, is there anything left that you want to say about how others can stand as this open door? Because what we need, of course, is more and more people to have as much courage as you do. Maybe 10 or 20 years ago, you or anyone in your position would have gotten very flustered and upset when challenged by this woman. But there are enough of us now, and enough of us with various types of expertise and good, strong credentials, that you are a strong open door. So either or both of those topics, I think, is where we might go.
They're both really excellent invitations, and I think they're tied together, because if you start to engage in this work in any way, you start to become that door. So I think I'm going to answer it in that way and combine that, if that's all right. So I did a talk at a festival over New Year's, and one of the questions that came up in that festival from the audience was, with everything that we face now, how do we be? How do we be? how can we show up and start to be like what you're describing as an open door? I think that person's question was coming more from a place of like, how do we not only just survive, but start to feel like there's hope? And the answer that I gave was one that I'd heard from, I'd listened to while I was giving the talk. I was listening to the trees and I was asking, what do you guys want to share? And I think it was something along the lines of, whatever decision you make in this world, let grace be the guiding force. It doesn't matter if you cannot see kindness around you. If you can't find a kind person, become that person. Because kindness and compassion go hand in hand. And so that was kind of like my 30-second answer for that question. But what I would say is if you want to get into, whether you want to get into nature communication or not is kind of irrelevant right now, because your question is more around just being an open door. And that would be my answer is showing compassion and grace in every situation. And this is not just for others. This is not just for them to walk through the door that you offer to a new reality. It's for yourself as well. Because in doing that, we ourselves become changed. So you being the door means you become the reality for yourself. And I'm actually going to listen now and ask, what does nature want to share in this moment? A lot of people talk right now about being light workers, about holding the light, about sharing the light. But what does that light mean? You know, is it becoming an energy healer or a Reiki practitioner or sound journey facilitator? Like, yes, all of the above. But ultimately, what is it for? And people talk about consciousness shift. Consciousness is always shifting. I'd like to think of it rather as elevating consciousness to a level where it doesn't dismiss the shadow that we face, because there's always going to be real evil in this world, in this universe. But ultimately, we always have a choice as much as possible. In every moment, we have these opportunities. Every 20 seconds, we make a decision. So, what is the decision you make? And rather than seeing a decision you're not happy with as failure, see it rather as, okay, next time I'll get it right. Avoid beating yourself up with decisions that you make that you feel unhappy with, because self-flagellation is also not great. That's old paradigm ways of thinking. Punishment. Nature doesn't want to be punishing just for the sake of punishment. It doesn't mean that. Okay, I'm going to kind of go off into a bit of a tangent here, but I think it goes hand in hand with. Okay, I'm going to say this. We'll see the mothers of animals in the animal kingdom. We'll see that mothers will punish their young when they do something silly to get them to listen. Okay, like grab them by the scruff of their neck and put them back into the path. It's a way of correcting behavior because of survival.
Mm.
So it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be self-correcting, but to
Right,
do that coming from a place of love rather than shame or anger or guilt
right,
or hatred or anything else or fear.
right. Yes, and I mean, I would suggest that's actually not punishment, because I would equate punishment with shaming and isolating. Correcting behavior, which parents have to do, I have been there myself, is hopefully is different from punishment, is a form of essential guidance.
I mean, let's talk for a moment about terminology. In the US especially, there are a huge amount of correctional facilities, and they're not correcting behavior, they are punishing people. The fact that one still has the death sentence, for example, as punishment is it means that there's a fluidity around language that those in power are using to control the narrative, as I was saying earlier on. So if we want to be this open door to what? From an old reality that has stopped serving us to a newer reality in which love is the guiding power. Grace is the force that is if grace can be a force. Grace is the energy that guides decision making, and compassion is the norm. What that requires is daily checking in with our decisions. And I had another point and now I've forgotten it off the top of my head. That was really important. It was about a doorway is a portal. So what are you being the portal for? And these are big terms. These are like love, joy, compassion, blah, blah, blah. It can sound very, very fluffy and woo until one realizes how much of a difference that makes. If you've never felt truly supported in your entire life, that's the one thing you're seeking. Whether it's from your family, or whether it's your friends or your partner, if you've never felt truly unconditionally loved, that is actually what is guiding most of the decisions that we make. People will climb the corporate ladder because they're seeking approval from a parent. They want their parent to be proud, but they would never be able maybe to name that, or to be able to win the love of a partner. So if we're going to be these doors from an old paradigm in which greed, fear, lust, anger, shame, hatred, grief are the guidance behind decisions, to one where love, compassion, kindness can be the norm, then that means cultivating that in oneself. And it starts by having experiences of that yourself. And if you cannot find that in your relationships with humans, seek that in the more than human. This is why so many people have companion animals, or what many people think of as pets, because animals, especially domestic animals, are the perfect example of how to experience unconditional love. But rather than being selfish and using an animal for that experience, how do you cultivate that with the animal and then share that with others? How do you share that with plants? How do you share that with the rats that you find running through cities and the pigeons flying through cities? How do you share that with the lamp on your desk and the food that you eat and your own body and your family members? And sure, family members, especially coming out of this festive season now, this is a tricky topic and it can feel like a minefield. And I'm not saying that you have to integrate all your family members in your life all the time. I've gone through a phase of having to love my family members, from certain family members from afar, and actually not have any contact with them because I couldn't find ways of integrating them. I had to, the most compassionate thing I could do at that time was show compassion for myself and certain family members by keeping distance from others. So sometimes that is needed. It's not like loving everybody means having everybody in your life all the time. But self-care is an act of compassion. This is now a popular thing in the world right now. But how does that look? It's by being disciplined with your self-talk as well. It's not just saying, I'm going to take a break and binge eat and binge watch Netflix series over the weekend because that's self-care. Maybe sometimes it looks like that, but other times it's going to look like doing breath work every morning, or a yoga practice, and or exercise, and or eating healthily, and or going on a camping weekend, or going and working at a soup kitchen, because that interaction with people who have less than you is what nourishes you. Whatever nourishes you right now and helps you to be that door that stands open for others to experience kindness is how we start to shift the narrative.
I
And there's
agree.
so
Beautifully
much,
said.
there's so much more I could share on that, but I'll leave it at that because, yeah.
No, I think it's very important, and you've expressed it really well, to be the portal, be the space for what you want to see in the world, and let other people witness you being that doorway or portal or space. And that in and of itself is an invitation and an opening for others.
And I don't get it right all the time.
No,
Absolutely
no,
not.
we can't.
But it's the practice and it's a fitness that we develop like any other skill.
Yes, absolutely. Saskia, what a pleasure for me to be in conversation with you. You and I see the world in so many similar ways, and I really honor your work. And As I've said, I was so thrilled to see that you had received that award. It's a beautiful turning point in the world right now, and one of thousands that are occurring. Please tell us how people can find your work if they would like to learn more with you.
Thank you, Shara. So I teach, as I mentioned, I teach online and in person. So on my ecofluency.org website is a tab at the top called Work With Me. And under that tab is a page called Events, Courses, and Workshops. And that is a list of all of the online and in-person events that I've got. For those people who might be listening in New Zealand, I am hosting a workshop by the time this podcast comes out. There will be one that I'm hosting in mid-March if you were in New Zealand, probably in the area of Hamilton and North Island. So that could be of interest. Um, there's also going to be an online course that I've co-designed with a friend and colleague of mine. And the course is in psychic sovereignty. So learning from the intelligence community and using approaches from the intelligence community to develop greater energetic safety and integrity in our nature communication practice, but it is actually applicable for everyday life. And that's going to be hosted with Ubiquity University online throughout March. And then I've got a bunch of in-person retreats and events happening in South Africa, in the UK, and in Canada, happening in March, all the way from April through to September, with more that will be listed throughout the next few months. And there will be more online courses that I'm designing with other colleagues of mine, specifically focused on academically minded people. So helping us find ways of rewilding our ontologies, which speaks to what you've described as becoming the door. So equipping people with the knowledge, the theoretical knowledge, and the skills of being able to shift paradigm, worldview, epistemology, and ontology to something that is nourishing for all of life. Yeah.
Oh, beautiful. Saskia, it is a thrill to me to see your work flourishing. I could not be more delighted. And thank you so much for your time with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Shara. I'm really, really grateful.